to keep things as informative and energetic as possible in a virtual environment here. Along the way, I would encourage you, if you have questions at any point, realize that as someone who spent a whole heck of a lot of time in the classroom, I don't mind if you want to stop me and interrupt. And at the same token, if you want to wait until the end and we can ask questions and stuff then too, that'll be fine as well. So without taking any more time here getting started, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get things up so that you can see our presentation here. Let's see, can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm just going to dive right into things and try to keep us moving through this as quickly as possible. Our story today, when we think about where we are economically, I think is a very interesting one, which is both a good thing and a bad thing. It means we've got a lot of things I think that are going on in our economy that are really positive, but at the same time, there are some issues out there that are going to be a little difficult for us to unpack and figure out really what they mean for us going forward. And there's some issues out there that are going to be beyond our control that are probably going to impact our market over the next couple of years. So with that said, let's jump right into things in terms of the presentation. I want to start by focusing in on how things have historically functioned in the state of Florida and in Southwest Florida in particular. You know, when we look at where we are, it's always important, I think, to start with this perspective from a very macro point of view. So I'm looking at GDP from a historical perspective here. And what's going to jump out to you, we're going to go back a few years and we look at things back during the last really big boom we saw in Southwest Florida. And the thing that jumps off the page at me here is that when things were going great during the last boom, Florida outperformed the U.S. economy as a whole by a significant margin. In Southwest Florida, our coastal counties exceeded the level of performance seen at the state level. So while the state was doing very, very well, we did even better. Okay, so if we fast forward from that to what we saw during the downturn, the U.S. economy took a big hit. You know, to have negative GDP of 2.8% is a pretty big hit. Things were worse off in Florida than they were across the country. Almost twice as bad as they were across the rest of the country. And that downside was even more pronounced in Collier and Charlotte County. Lee, we know things here were particularly tough as well. So my takeaway from this is, you know, the first slide, we saw that when things were great nationally, things were even better here. But when things go bad nationally, we look at this and we say, wow, if the nation's taking it on the chin, odds are in Florida and in Southwest Florida, it's going to be a little bit rougher here than the rest of the country. Then we jump ahead till we get back into the recovery, the start of this period that we were enjoying up until the first part of 2020. And we see things quickly reverted back when we got into a healthy environment, that situation where the U.S. economy is expanding, Florida is doing even better than the rest of the country, and Southwest Florida was again outperforming the remainder of the state. So I throw this out there because I think the perspective is important when we think about what's to come, okay? And this slide gives you a little bit longer view, okay? It goes all the way back to 1998. And in virtually every year, you see that whatever the country's experiencing, which is represented by the red bars, is a little bit more amplified when you think about the state of Florida. So we tend to swing a little bit more than the rest of the country. And the odds are we're going to see that again during the current cycle. Now, in the current cycle, I used to give my friend who's now our dean, Chris Wesley, is the head of the Regional Economic Research Institute, a hard time for using this slide, because coming out of the recovery, he loved this one, where we're just pushing tons and tons of money into the economy, and that was a big part of our story. Well, what we're doing today, or what I should say, what the central banks, not just in the United States, but around the world are doing today, makes what we had done coming out of the previous downturn look kind of minimal. Our Fed is pushing $120 billion of liquidity into the market every month. So there's a lot of cash flowing around out there, and everybody that's in this presentation is seeing this impact our markets today, because that money has to go somewhere, and a lot of it is ending up in real estate. Now, when we look at US GDP growth, this is a slide that we actually had in our presentations from a little over a year ago. And what we saw from this is that the projection going forward for the next 5 or 6 years was that GDP growth was going to be a good bit below where it had been historically. The change on this now is that instead of 2.2%, we're going to be struggling to get this above 2%, given everything that's happening in the economy today. So let's transition from that to sort of what's going on with the employment scene. I've taken out the information about wages because that was just going to be a little bit too slow for us, but I want to take a look at what's happening with employment, because all through the COVID crisis, unemployment and the numbers coming out there have been a really big part of the story. When we look at things, that the numbers here from Lee County and really from the whole state of Florida, actually the picture is probably better than we could have expected. If we went back 6-7 months ago, things really were looking pretty dire then. So I think in relative terms, we're doing pretty well. Probably the biggest takeaway to think about as a region before I talk about the individual counties is that when we look at employment in our region, the total employment is down by almost 6,000 people from our previous peak. So the actual number was 5,864 across the region. Unemployment in Lee County is up almost 4,000 people. The actual number there is 3,973. That shows that in November, so the latest data we have for Lee County, our unemployment rate was 6.4%. That was up just a little bit from October. In October, our number was 5.7%, but it bumped up again from there to 6.4% in November. Now, in order to have this in perspective, and you can get a little feeling from looking at the graph here, where the unemployment rate is that black solid line. If you go back to November of 2019, the unemployment rate in Lee County was only 3.2%. So pretty big change. But when we think about this in terms of really historical unemployment that we've seen in the United States, to be at under 6.5% at this stage with everything that's gone on, we're really, I think, in pretty good shape. The problem is it's very uneven as we look across industries in our region. So as we go from Lee, look down to the story in Collier, again, very similar numbers there. The November number for Collier County is 5.5% unemployment. That's up from 5% in October. And compared to 2019, in 2019 November, the unemployment rate in Collier was only 3.1%. So it was a super tight labor market then. And now it's closer to really a normal labor market. But again, the problem is the unevenness when we look across different sectors of the economy. We have a lot of people that have lost jobs with hospitality, but if you talk to anyone, and I'm sure all of you know people that are home builders or associated with construction, those folks are still struggling every day to fill jobs that they need to be able to bring product to the market. So it's a very uneven story when we look at our picture in terms of employment. Moving from Collier County to Charlotte County, again, a similar story. The numbers for unemployment in Charlotte County, it's up to 6% right now. It was 5.3% in October. So it moved up a little bit. Compared to 2019, we were at 3.7% in Charlotte County. So very similar story to what we saw in the other coastal counties here. To put this in the context of what's going on across the state and nationally, in Florida right now, we didn't see any change from October to November in terms of the overall unemployment rate for the state. It stayed steady at 6.4%, while the U.S. unemployment rate actually fell a little bit. It went down from 6.9% to 6.7% in November. And again, to go back and look at where the country was in 2019, at that point, it was only 3.5%. So, I mean, nationally, we had a super tight labor market as well. Now, from there, the next thing I want you to take a look at are taxable sales, because when we think about taxable sales, this is a way for us to sort of take the pulse of the economy. And it masks over some things, but again, it's probably one of the best things we can look at in order to get a feeling for how things are going in the economy. And if you look at this first graph, you see that we had a pretty predictable trend where these spikes that you're seeing represented season in Southwest Florida, where we would have a significant surge in tourist tax revenues. And then you see that surge started off, looked like we were going to have another record year in 2020. And that January date, remember we had the first confirmed death from COVID in the United States in January. This expansion or that spike continued over until about February, when we actually had the announcement from the president that they were going to be shutting things down. And at that point, our tourist tax revenue started to fall off a cliff. Okay, so we went from what would look like it was going to be another record year in tourist tax revenue to a year where we actually had a decline in tourist tax revenue. Because we had started so strong, though, the tourist tax revenue numbers for 2020 were only down 5% compared to 2019, which that number kind of surprised me. But still, we took a hit. It was a big hit, especially when you consider the fact that everybody that was in hospitality and tourism basically had set up for us to have a continued growth. And instead of positive growth, we ended up with a 5% overall decline for the year. And sort of buried in those numbers, the dollars that were spent in very different ways. Now, looking at things on the county basis, this next graph includes everything from Lee, Collier, and Charlotte County. We see that things there were a little different depending on which county we were looking at. If we look at Lee County first, and these numbers are seasonally adjusted. So there's a smoothing factor that's already been incorporated there. We saw in Lee County a 3% increase in November above what we saw in October of 2019. I'm sorry, that was an October number, I forget. These are lagged an extra month. So when we look at October of 2020 compared to October of 2019, we actually had a 3% increase in Lee County. However, when we go down to Collier County, that number, we had a 15% decline in Collier, and it was even more pronounced. If you look at the very tail end of the graph, in Charlotte, while the scale is smaller, the decline in tourist revenue in Charlotte County was actually 25% from what it was in October of 2019. And to take a shorter view, if we look at how October compared to September, just in 2020, in Lee, the numbers fell off by 12%. In Charlotte, they were down 15%. And in Collier County, they were down 17% compared to September of 2020. So what that tells me is that, yes, we had a big effect through 2020, but when you think about the numbers that we're seeing in fall, for us to see those sort of month over month declines from September to October, things are still shaking out here in terms of tourist revenues and what this is going to mean for our friends that are working in hospitality here in Southwest Florida. Now, another number or series of numbers that we pay a lot of attention to that's more at the macro level are the numbers that come out of taxable sales. Okay, so this graph looks at taxable sales across our 5-county service area for the university, which in addition to Charlotte, Collier, and Lee, includes Glades and Hendry County. Okay, but still the majority of the economic activity is what's going on out here at the coast. When we look at that, the numbers are up 7% in terms of total taxable sales since September of 2019. Okay, so that's what we're seeing with that solid black line there. We've still got a very positive trend in terms of economic growth for the region as a whole. It also sort of reinforces the idea that many of us have probably had for a long time, is that while everything else seems to be still going very well, hospitality is really taking a hit. When we move to the county level and we look at things for Lee mirrors what was going on with the overall region. It's up 7% compared to 2019. So that trend line, of course, you skip past the big dip during the period where we were locked down. The trend's still very positive. Lee's taxable sales are up 7% over the previous year. In Collier, it's even more pronounced. In Collier County, the sales in September were up 9% over the previous year. So we almost made it to a double-digit increase there. In Charlotte, it's a little bit smaller economy, but still the numbers were up. In Charlotte, the numbers are up 3% compared to 2019. So when we think about our coastal economies, while they all show clear evidence of this massive impact from the shutdown, the trend is positive. And that relates to a lot of what's going on with the economy on a broader basis and the fact that we've got people continuing to move to Southwest Florida. Now, this is a graphic that I had to go back and pull out from old presentations because this is one that I've always used to talk about our seasonality, okay? And what this is showing is taxable sales for a nice long period going back to 2005 and up through mid-year 2018. And we see the same thing over and over again. There's a big spike in taxable sales during season, and then things fall off in the off season year after year. But the thing that had jumped out to us was that when you look at, in particular, say Lee and Collier County, which are the red and green lines on the graph here, that swing from off season to on season is becoming more pronounced. So our seasonality was actually increasing. So in terms of what we've been trying to accomplish in the economy, what many people have been working for, trying to diversify our economic base, this data actually showed that we were losing a bit of ground. Now, one of the things, we don't have data on it yet to really be able to measure it, but one of the things that we expect to see coming out of this is that hospitality and tourism is going to contract a little bit. And as a result, this seasonality may be dampened a bit as we come out of this current situation. Okay, now I want to transition over into the housing, the real estate side of things. This is going to be some data that y'all are probably at least more familiar with the stuff that's in the particular market where you're working than just about anybody could be. But I think there's some important takeaways from this data. So let's jump right in. And when we look at what's going on with the first thing I want to focus on are the building permits. When you look at the region as a whole, and the graph that I've got up, the graph is for Lee County, but before I delve into that one, for the region as a whole, our permit numbers from 2019, November 2019 to November 2020, those permit numbers were up over 22%. So it's a good move there. We're trying to add supply. The downside of that was the November numbers actually represented a decline from what was pulled in October. That number in October was just over 1,300, and we had about a 20% decline from October to November in terms of permits pulled. So we're adding supply, and my impression from everybody I talked to is that as quickly as the supply is added and the units are completed, they're selling. Looking at what was happening in Lee County, the numbers in Lee, while it's our biggest market in terms of the total numbers, in Lee, they pulled 645 permits in November. This represented a 38% increase compared to November of 2019. So 38% increase in the number of permits pulled there. However, that number, just like the region as a whole, actually represented a decline in the number of permits that were pulled from October. In October, they pulled 716. So you had a 10% decline from the previous month. In Collier County, while the graph looks the same, the numbers are a little more realistic or more sustainable. November in Collier County, we had a 4% increase over 2019. Now you can see there was this spike here in October. In October, they pulled 352 permits and only 244 in November. So we actually had a 31% decline from October to November, but that's just noise in the series. You know, when you think about the permits that are going to be pulled, this is impacted at least as much by the availability of lands that builders have, lots, they're ready to go, as it is things from the demand side. So there's a little noise in the series when we look at that. In Charlotte County, again, positive trend line in terms of number of permits being pulled over time, but again, we see a decline from October to November. The November number represented a 3% increase over what was pulled in 2019, but again, we see this decline compared to October. It's a 29% decline in November compared to what was pulled in October. The good news, though, when we look at this across all the coastal counties, positive trend line in terms of number of permits being pulled. Now, when we look at sales of single-family homes, and these are the sales from realtors, we've got a lot of information packed into these next few graphs. Across the region, Before I get to the Lee County numbers again, regionally, we saw a 43% increase in the number of properties sold from November of 2019 to November of 2020. So just a huge increase. That number was almost 2,500 homes. The actual number was 2,495 across our coastal counties. In Lee County, we saw a 36% increase from 2019. And whenever you see a move like that, of course, you're going to see a big move in median home price. And we did. In Lee County, that median home price number was up 21.6%. It jumped from $262,500 to over $319,000. Really big move in median price. And I'm sure that everybody listening, your experience in dealing with customers probably reflects that. If properties were in good condition and relatively reasonably priced, they seem to be moving very, very quickly. In Collier County, again, a very similar story. The Collier numbers, though, when you look at the percentage increase from 2019 to 2020, it's a lot more profound. The percentage increase in numbers sold was a 66% increase in the number of homes sold. And we saw an even bigger move in the median home price. Median home price went from $435,000 to over $550,000. So a 26% increase in median home price. And we know whenever we see a move like that, it's a reflection of what's happening in the market, that interaction of supply and demand. When we've got significantly constrained supply combined with very strong demand, that's the only way you can get to that sort of move. In Charlotte County, they had a 39% increase in the number of properties sold compared to 2019. And again, a big move in the median home price, not as big as we saw in Collier and Lee, but still it jumped 12%. Okay, it went up from $239,950 to almost $270,000. So what was once the affordable option in Southwest Florida is quickly becoming a good bit pricier. We look across those numbers, that's a really strong year. But as y'all are probably experiencing it on a daily basis, when we look at these numbers, the thing that goes hand in hand with that is the inventory story. The number of listings available out there is, if I had talked to you a year ago, you probably would have told me, hey, we need more product. Well, that story is much more pronounced now. So let's look at sort of start with the overall region. Across our coastal counties, we've got 10,481 active listings right now. That's down 39% from November of 2019. And it's down 6% just since October. So the number's down a lot, and it's continuing to fall. Our first graph here, we're looking at Lee County. Okay, Lee County's got 4,804 active listings. As of the day we pulled this, I'm sure that number's taken a hit since then. That's down 42% since November of last year. And here's the real story. Okay, if we look back, here's November of last year, the midpoint in our graph. This downward trend in inventory, this is not a one-year story. Last year we were feeling that inventory was a bit constrained. That trend just continued right on its downward path. In fact, it's actually more pronounced now than it was last year. So everybody's dealing with the same thing. I've talked to folks all up and down the west coast of Florida, up in Sarasota and Tampa, and talking to folks up there. They're facing the exact same thing. There's a lot of money flowing into the area, and properties are selling very quickly, and a lot of times above asking price. Let's switch from Lee down to Collier. Again, we see a similar story. Collier's got 4,364 listings right now. That's down 36% from November of 2019. And just like Lee, it's down 6% just from last month. And just like Lee, it's not a one-year story, but a two-year story. This decline in inventory, things are just getting tighter and tighter down there. And that's how you end up with 20% plus moves, upward moves in prices. Look at Charlotte. In Charlotte, there are currently just over 1,300 active listings. That's down 36%. Just like Collier County, it's down 36% from November of last year. And it's down 3% just over the last month. So when we think about our inventory situation, what we saw with the builders combined with what we're seeing in terms of active listings out there, inventory is constrained now. It's probably going to continue to be significantly constrained for at least the short term. Now, when I talk about the inventory in the market, I always like to throw out the numbers of projections about where we're going in terms of population, because populations are our big driver in terms of consuming housing. And, you know, when we look at the population growth, these numbers have been revised. Our current projection for Lee County by 2045 is that we're going to be just a little shy of this number. Currently, we're projecting 1,057,000 in Collier County, or I'm sorry, in Lee County. So that number's moved down a little bit. The projection has stayed the same for Collier County, still projecting 517,000 people in Collier County by 2045. And when we look at Charlotte, the number there has been adjusted a little bit. Now they've bumped that number up. Now the expectation for Charlotte is that it'll actually hit 233,000 by 2045. So our expectation is that we're going to continue to see more folks moving into Southwest Florida. I will tell you that my personal take on these numbers and these projections are that they are, at least currently, quite conservative. I think we're ahead of this trend line in terms of the number of people moving into our area. One of the big impacts from COVID has been people fleeing cities in the Northeast, and they are showing up in our markets, as many of you know, ready to buy properties here and escape the bad weather and the high taxes of the Northeast. So they're coming to Southwest Florida, and they're thinking that our deals, even with the prices at today's levels that we think are relatively high, we still look like a pretty dang good deal. So they're coming down here and spending a lot of money buying properties and burning through inventory as fast as we can bring it to market. So from here, I want to throw out some things that are, I think, on the horizon. Okay. The first thing's the big one. You know, this is the big issue. It's the pandemic. When does this actually end? Okay. We've got a lot riding on the efficacy of the virus and our ability, the vaccine for the virus, and our ability to distribute this, get a lot of people vaccinated so that we end up with herd immunity, and then the overall economy will recover and continue on. Because without the national economy recovering and being truly robust, what we're seeing in Southwest Florida, I don't think we can expect it to continue. Because when you go back and you think about that first couple of slides I showed you, we're tied to what's going on nationally. We always have been. I think we're going to continue to be to some degree. The thing is, the way everything fits together now, post-COVID, is probably going to be a little different than it was prior to that. Big thing that has always helped us coming out of any downturn in the United States is the consumer. The consumer is the one who leads all economic recoveries. For everything the Fed would like to do in terms of controlling and steering the economy, it's the consumer and consumer spending that ultimately pulls us out of any economic downturn. So when we look at consumer confidence right now, it is significantly impaired compared to where it was a few years ago, and in particular where it was prior to the COVID outbreak in the United States. Prior to the COVID outbreak, the Florida Consumer Confidence Index was at an all-time high. It was at 101. They scale it relative to 100. Currently, or the November number, it was just over 80. It was 80.7. So that's a really significant hit in terms of consumer confidence. For the United States, the numbers were similar. Over 100, now down close to 80. So consumer confidence is a very big issue in terms of the overall economy getting going and being healthy and pulling us out and starting to expand. Now, one thing that sort of plays along with this that relates very closely to consumer confidence is the confidence in the business sector. One of our relatively new residents in Southwest Florida is an economist by the name of Bill Dunkelberg. And Dr. Dunkelberg leads the National Federation of Independent Businesses. He's their chief economist, and he does a survey of small business owners. And in this, one of the things they do is they ask them a lot about their confidence going forward and the degree of uncertainty, their plans for investment and such. And in their most recent survey, two very big things came out of that. Number one, when you look at confidence of small business owners nationwide, their confidence has taken a really big hit. And following the election, it declined significantly again. It fell by about 5 points. Again, it's on a scale of 1 to 100, like the Consumer Confidence Index. The other thing that the small business owners reported that's notable is that their degree of uncertainty increased a whole lot. So when uncertainty increases, that means they're seeing greater risk. They're likely to be more conservative, not spend as much on new investment projects. So we really have to keep an eye on what's going on with small business. If you listen to Dr. Dunkelberg or ever get to hear him speak, he'll point out to you that the small business in the United States represents the equivalent of the third largest economy in the world. So it's a really big factor in terms of our overall economic health. So consumer confidence, business confidence, those are concerns going forward. The next thing I've got here is monetary policy. When you look at the news that's coming out of the Federal Reserve and the Federal Open Market Committee, they're committed to keeping interest rates low. How long they can keep them historically low is a very big question for us. While we see our markets right now, they're influenced by a lot of people that are coming in from out of state. And at the margin, these folks are showing up with cash and making full price or above offers for some properties. The people that live here that are still relying on mortgage financing are significantly impacted by the interest rate level. And with our prices being pushed up, if we start to see an increase in interest rates, that's really going to hurt our affordability numbers in Southwest Florida. The next thing was an issue, in Florida, we had the amendment that was on the ballot in this last election about increasing our minimum wage. Now we have a president who's pushing to get a federal $15 an hour minimum wage. And while this will certainly help some folks, when we think about the impact on hospitality and tourism, especially in its very fragile situation right now, that could really have a significant and potentially a significant negative impact on the recovery of that portion of the Florida, and in particular Southwest Florida economy. So that's something we're going to have to see how that works out. You know, in Florida, we had things spaced out where things were going to go first to $11 an hour and then bump up from there until we got to $15 an hour. So it wasn't going to be an overnight thing. And also wasn't going to, you know, just hit right now as we're still in the throes of the pandemic. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. It's kind of hard to say exactly how that's going to impact things. Odds are it's going to slow recovery. Population growth. Okay, I showed you the slide. The numbers are, we're still expecting a lot of in-migration. This is a great place to live. Even with our increases in prices, our prices aren't out of line for, especially for folks that are coming from high-priced areas in the Northeast. But the question is, where do they find housing? So I don't know how many of you know this. We have a brand new provost who is the sort of the second in charge. It's not sort of, he is the second in charge at Florida Gulf Coast University. Had the opportunity to meet with him yesterday, and Dr. Rieger moved here, and he's living in an apartment. Hasn't been able to find a house yet, basically because the inventory is really constrained, and well, we put him to work immediately. So it's taking a little while to get going, but just like many other people coming into the area, having a hard time finding housing. So we look back to our numbers in terms of permits that we're pulling. Are we going to be able to keep pace with the growth, or where is that balance in supply and demand going to be? Where are these folks going to find housing? Got to keep an eye on that. Also, right now, we haven't seen any impact from people losing their jobs or having their hours cut back because of forbearance. Going to have to see what happens in our market. A lot depends on how this is handled at the state and federal level. Are we going to continue to extend forbearance for those folks that have been severely impacted by the pandemic and the resulting shutdown? So that's going to be a very delicate issue. And it could result in sort of a wave of foreclosures if it's not handled properly. Then affordability issues. Housing affordability, get ready for it, folks. We're going to be talking about this for the next few years. It was starting to heat up a little bit prior to the pandemic, and I think it's going to be a headline issue moving forward. When we think about recruitment, and we go out to, say, hire new faculty to come to Florida Gulf Coast University, or to go to work or employees go to work for anybody in Southwest Florida, teachers, healthcare workers, housing affordability is going to be an issue for us. So we're going to have to find some solutions for that moving forward. And then the last thing that I put on here, and this was something that no matter which side of the political aisle you're on, if you listen to both candidates in the election, both of them were throwing out some ideas that we needed to be much more protectionist, to produce more goods here in the United States, and that's going to happen. The question is just how strong is that movement going to be? And what's that going to mean for us in terms of trade and prices? You know, if it's a very extreme measure, then again, that could have a negative impact on growth and recovery, and also start to feed. When you combine that with an increase in minimum wage, you're starting to set the stage for inflation. You've got a lot of money in the economy from the Fed. There's a lot of liquidity out there. We're raising wages. We're going to have to raise prices on goods and products if we're producing things here that have traditionally been produced somewhere else that was cheaper. So we kind of set the stage there for potential inflation. So these are this is my list of things that I am concerned about going forward. And we'll just have to see how these things shake out. So to wrap things up, a few conclusions for us. When we look at the regional economy, wow, it's a couple of different stories. The headline has to be uncertainty in hospitality. There's a lot of our friends and neighbors that are in hospitality and tourism down here that are really hurting right now. We're back into season. The question that I have had for everybody, we know it's going to be a somewhat compromised season in terms of their earning ability this year. I think the big question is just how compromised that is. Luckily, we seem to be getting the vaccine down here, and our distribution efforts are working hopefully better every day. But still, there's a lot of uncertainty with respect to hospitality. We've got tremendous strength in other areas. Again, the home building and that part of our economy seems to be going great. And because of that, we've got scarcity of labor with respect to any of the trades. We've got scarcity of labor in healthcare. We were facing capacity issues pre-COVID. Those capacity issues are, if anything, just more pronounced now. So we definitively need more labor here, but it's the right mix of labor that we need. Our housing market, the inventory issues, folks, they're not going anywhere. I'm sorry, I'm skipping over the diversification. And I apologize for doing that. When you think about the overall economy, first of all, we're not very well diversified. We've made some progress over the last few years. Historically, the line I've had under here has been that our economy was fueled by tourism and retirement. But now I think we have to say it's being fueled by migration and retirement. So it's not just retirees that are coming here. There are a lot of folks that are still working that are moving to Florida. If you've been following the headlines out of New York, probably the biggest news in the fall was that Goldman Sachs announced that they were going to move out of New York. And they're primarily locating to South Florida. And that's both Southwest Florida and Southeast Florida. Now, depending on your views of folks from New York, some of you might be happy that I-95 runs down that East Coast, and more of our friends from New York are going to end up over there than here. But still, we've got a lot of folks that are migrating to Florida. The question about tourism, how quickly it responds, how it comes out of this, it's still going to be a big part of our economy. But really, for the folks in that sector, they've got a tremendous amount riding on our ability to get this vaccine out there and get the virus under control so that they can get back to operating at close to capacity. Still got seasonality in our economy, still volatile. We're still probably going to swing more than the national average. Our housing market, I've hit this several times. Inventory issues are going to continue to be out there. If we've got inventory issues, you're going to have upward pressure on pricing. How extreme that is really depends, I think, a lot on the confidence level in the economy, the price of money, and how many folks can continue to try to flee the cities in the Northeast. Affordability issues are going to become more and more of an issue. How are we going to provide housing out there for first responders, school teachers, healthcare workers, university faculty? These are going to be important issues for us to deal with. And we were seeing strains on the infrastructure before. If you drive up and down 41 or I-75, try to go, think about capacity at the hospitals or in our schools. There was a lot of strain on the infrastructure. We're growing at a pretty good clip anyway, so that strain on the infrastructure has not been relieved. But the big piece, and why I think it's important to have this listed here now, is that when we think about the state economy slowing down. It's going to take a hit. Dollars from Tallahassee to help with infrastructure investment are probably going to be constrained for the next year or two. So that's something where we're probably going to have some issues that we just have to live with, and things may be just as good as they're going to get. The thing I'll tell you going away from this, it's really important to keep your eye on what's going on nationally. our relationship with the national economy, that historical relationship, it may be weakened, but I suspect it's always going to be there. The protectionist policies, the minimum wage, what happens with the Fed and the price of money. Those are the things that we've got to consider nationally. And then one thing that I didn't put in here, when we think about our economy here in Southwest Florida, a piece that's missing this season are a lot of our international visitors. You know, when you look across sales for real estate in Southwest Florida, we're almost always double digit to international buyers, and those folks can't get here this year. I've got a good friend in Oslo, Norway. I can tell you that he really wishes he was here right now because it's cold in Oslo, and they're having a terrible time with the virus. So at some point, those folks will be able to come back to Southwest Florida, and they'll be jumping in and buying units again, renting units, and contributing to our economy. But right now, they're not part of the mix. So we'll have to see how soon all these things are sorted out and things get back to some degree, hopefully, of normalcy. So with all that, that's all I've got for the formal presentation. And I'll be happy to take any questions that you have. Okay.
Will we get an email of the slides?
I can certainly make that happen for you. Be glad to share those with you. I'll send them to Angela as soon as we wrap things up here.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
If you have any questions, you can unmute yourself and ask your question. Some of you had questions in the chat.
Let's see, I can go back and pull up the chat now that I'm no longer rambling on. Okay, so we had a question about the spike after January 20. Go back to that. So, yeah, that was this. I assume this was referring to the unemployment situation. So unemployment spiked rather significantly. And that was related to the initial shutdown.
Sounds good.
Let's see, Tony had a question about the permit decline from October to November. When we look at what happens with permits, again, that series of numbers, it's never a nice, smooth flow. So if you're a builder and you've just acquired a number of lots, you'll probably go in and pull a big batch of permits from those. And when you go from month to month, that's usually not a nice, smooth number. So when they pull a batch like that, we see that number bounce up and down a little bit as we go through time. So I try not to focus too much on what's happening on a month-to-month change with the change in permits. Okay, and Beverly had also asked about the sales price and median price increases for each county. Those will be in the slides, so you'll have the actual numbers there that you can see with the bars and stuff in the slides when you get those. Also, if y'all are interested in these numbers, all the data and stuff that I use to produce the presentation today comes from the Regional Economic Research Institute at Florida Gulf Coast University. So my colleague, Dr. Amir Nato, produces this data, and he puts out a monthly report of economic indicators, as well as a number of other studies through the course of the year. And if anybody is interested in receiving those, feel free to shoot me an email. I'll get you on the list for that. There's a ton of great information in there that goes well beyond what I was presenting today. But of course, because real estate's such a big part of our economy, there's a lot of emphasis on real estate there. And we're working to increase the real estate content going forward. So again, if you want to have access to some of this data with their monthly analysis of it, feel free. Angela's got all my contact information. Shoot me a note and we'll get you on the distribution list for that as well. Let's see, had a question down here about inflation, just slightly at or below 2%. And good question, what's the outlook on inflation given the elements I've talked about, housing price, wage growth, increased demand, consumer confidence growth? I'll tell you, as somebody right now, just to throw my cards out on the table, I'm 55 and I'm looking at my portfolio and I'm thinking about retirement here in about a decade. And my number one concern going into that is what is going to happen with inflation between now and the time that I'm actually ready to retire. Hopefully I can go longer than 65, but it's kind of hard to bank on that. I suspect that we're going to have inflation. The question is just how much. You can't take the minimum wage and more than double it and not have inflationary impacts. If you walk into Publix, Lowe's, Home Depot, any number of these retailers across the region and look at what that's going to do to their starting wage for an unskilled labor person coming in the door, that's going to change their cost structure. They'll have no choice but to pass that along to us in terms of higher prices. So inflation's coming. It's a question of how soon it hits and how strong it will be. But I think that we should enjoy today's low interest rates and what that allows participants in our markets to do. And just savor it while it's here, because at some point we're going to have inflation and that'll be reflected in interest rates moving forward. I had a great question here about forbearance. Maria had asked, what do we see happening with forbearance, and do you think the economy is going to crash? I really think that politically, extension of forbearance is going to be one of those things that happens because we all know what it was like during the last downturn. Seeing people lose their homes is just, it's heart-wrenching. It's very disruptive to the economy. It does create economic opportunity for some people that are picking up the pieces, but in terms of the politics of the issue, I suspect we will find a way for forbearance to be extended, and they'll gradually taper that off. And I think it's hard to think that the economy is going to crash. I think for the way I see things, it's probably going to be a slower recovery than what we might want. I think there's also the possibility, depending on how strong the move to protectionist policies becomes, I think there's the possibility that we could end up in sort of a stagflation type environment, where the economy grows very slowly, but we start to see that impact of inflation along with it. I think that's probably the more likely outcome. Let's see. Also had a question here about Charlotte County. So we seem to have a lot of building going on in Charlotte County. And why do people want to go to Charlotte County? Well, I think the first part of that story's got to be price. You know, when you look at what's happened in Collier County, I jokingly, when we're recruiting new faculty now to the university, I tell them, so, well, you know, you can consider living in Collier and Charlotte. I'm sorry, in Lee and Charlotte, but we're not going to pay you enough for you to be able to go to Collier County. We don't have that kind of money at FGCU. So, you know, there's still some affordable stuff in Collier, but when you look at affordability, quality of life, what you're getting for that dollar, the value proposition, I think to a lot of folks when they look at Charlotte County, it's a lot better. And as the amenity base expands up there, I think you'll continue to see that trend of the numbers going up in Charlotte County. And I think we could expect to see that price differential as that happens continue to tighten. Probably not as much as it has over the last 2 years, but it'll probably continue to tighten. Let's see, the economic resource. I believe this was, someone was asking about this. That's the Regional Economic Research Institute at FGCU. And again, I'll make sure that we include contact information with that, with the slides that I have, that I pass along to Angela. Then one more quick question here. I know somebody asked about how about rent, and said, I've heard rent might be forgiven. I think that in some cases that may be the situation. You know, if you talk to folks, particularly landlords that are on the commercial side, virtually everybody out there has had to work with tenants to either change rates, maybe forgive rent already, to try to keep spaces from going dark. On the commercial side, particularly retail, at this point, that's probably everybody's number one concern. They really don't want to lose any tenants because it's probably going to be a while before they can put a new tenant in there. On the apartment and residential rental side, you know, I'm not sure what will happen there in terms of rents being forgiven. I think there may be a situation where we absolutely have to work out some sort of payment plans, because at the end of the day, those landlords, they have to make mortgage payments. They have to make payments for taxes and cover the expenses for insurance and upkeep of the units. So that's a really tough question there. I don't know how much rent you can forgive and not have problems if you're the landlord and you have any debt at all in your capital structure. Okay, folks, so I think I made it through most of the questions there in the chat. Does anybody have anything else you'd like for me to touch on? Well, thank you very much for having me this morning. Hope everybody has a great day and that we find a way for 2021 to be a heck of a lot better year than 2020. And I look forward to maybe next time we get to talk that I can actually be there with you in person. It's hard for me to sit down and get all the way through one of these conversations. So thank you very much. And thank you, Angela, for reaching out to me and setting everything up and letting me visit with everyone today.
And thank you for being here with us. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
You bet. I'll shoot those slides over in just a minute and I'll put
okay. Sounds good.
For the RER. All right. Take care.
All right. Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.